All right, you good to go, Heather?
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Hopefully everybody had good conversations. I know that our room definitely did. So I'm going to bounce around to the facilitators and ask everybody if they wouldn't mind sharing just a takeaway or a valuable discussion point that you guys had. And I'm actually going to start with Chip, who was in the room with me. I figured instead of you guys hearing me for another 2 minutes, that I could defer to the brains of the operation and let Chip take it.
Oh, thanks, Heather. No, I think that as we had our conversation, the real key point that came through on the marketing side when it came to marketing consumer-wise and Fran Dev is it all starts from the top. And, you know, the leadership team that they're in agreement with the strategies on the consumer and the Fran Dev side, that they're working hand in hand. Because without that, because I've worked from organizations in the past that, you know, Fran Dev was a stepchild. And I've worked for other organizations where Fran Dev was all about franchise development and sales, and we got the resources that were there. But it always, in any organization I work with, guys, it started from the top down. If the leader, that whether it's the CEO or the VPs or whatever, we're not on the same page together and collaborating, it wasn't going. Everybody was trying to figure it out all on their own. And having that collaboration with the higher ups and what the goals are and where Fran Dev plays and marketing plays is key for the success of any organization out there, as we discussed. So I don't know, Heather, if you wanted to add anything else to that.
No, I think that was well said, Chip. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
All right, so now I'm going to just kind of bounce to the rest of the facilitators. So Matt, would you like to share what was discussed in your room?
I would be happy to. Thanks, Heather. Great discussion with our panel. It was great to hear. Just some solutions around the tension between marketing and Fran Dev at times. I think one thing that stood out to me was that if Fran Dev is setting their goals for selling units throughout the year, then a budget should be tied to that from them, but then really set some clear measurable metrics for marketing to follow, right? And so that there's some alignment there on an overall goal and then some metrics that both departments are agreeing upon to hit throughout the year. I think second then is like being willing to combine a consumer message with a recruitment message. Sometimes that's easy to do. Sometimes brands struggle with that. But I think if you can bring both departments to the table to combine that messaging, you know, that's kind of where the sweet spot is. And then lastly is just setting up like proper alignment and expectations for candidates from a Fran Dev perspective. You know, we're working with candidates. We're telling them about marketing. We're telling them about the things that they get when they open. And then sometimes that's a miss when marketing actually takes over for that candidate. So I think in trusting that conversation throughout is also really important for both departments to trust each other.
Awesome. Thank you. That sounds like you guys had a great conversation. Sherry, do you want to share what happened in your room? Maybe.
I am not muted anymore. Okay, so we had a great conversation. We had a really nice mix of franchisors in our breakout room, and it was very interesting when we looked at the majority of our room had a combined effort of franchise development and marketing and the consumer marketing as well. So they had a lot on their plate. And what we found out really and focused upon was the fact that that marketing and development can work very well together, and really focus and lean on the storytelling of the marketing, talking to the development team, and really selling it internally, and to the point of really striving every day to educate each other internally so that you can bridge the gap between the two departments. And because ultimately many of these organizations, these brands, the consumer is also the franchise development candidate. So we want to make sure that we are touching upon all of the right all the right points and making sure that we are focusing on garnering the right type of leads and also getting the right type of customers. So that was really the focus of that. And we also talked about process, the importance of process. And I think that the hard thing about development is because a lot of things are last minute, and process is, there's a sales mentality, and sales mentality doesn't always bode well to process when it comes to getting assets in creative. So I think there has to be an understanding of what your sweet spot is, and learning to work together and compromise. So we found that process from both sides really works well. And even adoption of new tools, working together, we found that from all of our participants, that it was agreement across the board that any kind of tools that came to be, that should be brought through with everybody deciding, including franchisees. So that's really what the conversation focused on.
Awesome. Thanks so much for sharing. Mark, what about you and your group?
Thank you. Great conversation. I'm going to turn my video off because I seem to be freezing up here, so maybe that'll help a little bit. Anyway, so great conversation. You know, one of the key things that came out of our conversation, ironically, was collaboration and the importance of working with marketing and Fran Dev. Ironically, there was nobody on the marketing side in our room, but we still got to that same conclusion, and how important collaboration was. And I think that all three of the folks that were on the Fran Dev side had very strong walls between their brand fund and their Fran Dev efforts. I know we do, and the other two did as well, which means that you have to be cognizant of the time that is spent, not taking it away from what the franchisees are paying for, but you still obviously need that collaboration. And I think the other part that was interesting to talk about is we obviously had Trevor there, so the importance of video and how well video is important in everything we do. But I also think sharing costs, you know, we all talked about the fact that if you do have a brand fund and you have a separate Fran Dev effort, which is completely different and defined, that there is opportunity to share costs across both so that you can use different materials like video and PR and other efforts that really work to serve both the brand and Fran Dev. But you may be able to reduce your marketing budget either on the Fran Dev side or share some of the costs coming out of the brand side. And then one of the other parts I thought that was really interesting was obviously, aside from overall collaboration, but including the marketing folks maybe in things like trade shows and obviously the recruitment process, so they could hear it from the candidate and maybe understand some of the efforts that everybody can participate in. So it was a great conversation.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Glenn, what about you?
Yeah, so I think we had a great mix in our group, from somebody brand new that has one unit on the board now, which was great to hear, to people with hundreds of units and decades of experience. So we got some really, really good conversation with different perspectives in it. It did keep kind of circling back to some of the things that we've been talking about. You know, it's about maintaining the brand standards is very important, about sharing of assets, about continuous constant communication. So each department is understanding where the other one is coming from, and just the collaboration between the two has to be constant. It can't be, you know, it didn't seem like, you know, once a month is not really the answer to that. Once a quarter, it doesn't seem to be the answer. And then I heard somebody make a comment that I hadn't heard for years, but I actually, it used to be so true. Unfortunately, it seems to be something that is dissipating in our world, thankfully, but, you know, don't live in silos. You know, these departments have got to be much more collaborative, and silos just are not the solution to anything. And I hadn't heard that for years, but it was a great reminder. So it comes down, you know, the bottom line is constant collaboration, sharing of the ideas, leaning on each other for their expertise and their help and their assistance on a regular basis.
Awesome. Thanks.
Yeah.
Julia, what about you?
Well, so our group was very mixed between friend dev only, consumer only, and then a lot of people who did both. So, you know, we kind of had every side of the story. But at the end of the day, it all comes down to, you know, you're all telling the same story. You're all representing the brand the same way. You're all putting the same messaging out there. And just, you know, that collaboration to make sure that happens is ultimately, you know, the winner for both sides. So, you know, not a lot to add to things that, you know, that were not already discussed in other breakout rooms, but, you know, it was a lot about just telling the same story and being on the same brand story at all times.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. Seth, what about you?
Yeah, so not to echo everybody, but you know, I think the word is collaboration, and I think kind of branching off of that is actually having people on both sides that want to collaborate and want to make sure that the brand is successful, with starting from new potential franchisees all the way through those that are even exiting and selling their stores. One great piece that we got out of our breakout room was Emma over at Home Helpers Healthcare. They had hired a chief performance officer to where the franchise development and the marketing team actually met with them and reported, so that they had everybody on the same page. So, and then they would also report to somebody else. I think that was such a great idea, having both sides reporting to the same person for collaboration.
Awesome. It's definitely an interesting approach. I'm curious to maybe learn a little more about that. So you might see a message from me trying to pick someone's brain on that one. Brandy K.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, so we had a really interesting conversation, and to kind of boil it down, the majority of our group had a separate marketing, consumer marketing team, as well as the separate FranDev marketing team. So I think if that's not the case in the organization, it's really important, as Dwan said, to, you know, set expectations up front on how much time you're going to spend, because that can be a slippery slope. But the overall gist of our conversation was, I think it's important for a franchisor to be willing to combine that consumer message with the FranDev message. I think someone else had said that. There was a lot of people in our group that were seeing good results from those types of efforts. So, you know, often a Z can come from a loyal customer. So, you know, doing some sort of FranDev recruiting in the salon, studios, whatever type of business that you might be running, that has shown good results. And then having some sort of lead form or referral fees for your franchisees, that seemed to be working well for some of the franchisors. But it's also important for franchisees to understand that growth is good, you know, all around for the brand. So, you know, increasing the brand footprint is important. So just continuing to educate franchisees on the importance of that for their brand, and just use the power of the network. So an example that our friend Kim at WellBiz used, which I thought was really great, is they took Instagram and they created a story of a successful franchisee, and basically just made panels, talked about why she started the business, you know, what she's doing. And of course, it was Women Entrepreneur Week, so she tied all of that together, and that really worked out well for their business. Of course, at the end, they had a call to action to start your own business, you know, become a candidate. So those types of things in PR and social are really working well when you have a franchisee tell their story and their success. So that is it in a nutshell, is, you know, use the power of the network, have franchisees tell their stories locally.
Awesome. I love that Instagram idea. I just see a couple people write that one down. So
Yeah.
that's a good one. Thank you. Brandy C.
We also had a really, really great conversation. Everybody was very participatory. I think, you know, it echoed a lot of what we're saying here, but I think the one little nugget that came out of our group is the word understanding, and understanding what the goals are of the marketing team and understanding what the goals are of the Fran Dev team. And there's very different structures, right? There's franchise sales that's what they need to do. They need to sell. And on the marketing side, they need to support the franchisees. So it is very important to not only collaborate, but have meetings set so that you can plan for these assets that you might need. We all don't like having to pull, resources at the very last minute. So it's just very important to be understanding of what that other team needs and what their goals are. And, maybe it's a bonus structure that the Fran Dev team is trying to get somewhere and the marketing team is trying to get somewhere, but to understand those goals as a whole, so that you guys can all work together and be collaborative.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing. Dwan.
Okay, we had a really good and in-depth conversation, and probably the biggest thing hit probably towards the end of the conversation, where it just really came down to making sure that both sides, marketing and Fran Dev, understand what does having more franchisees mean for the company, and making and aligning on that by really getting a good feel of more Z's means more royalties, which a lot of times it means more dollars to the ad fund, more that the marketing team can actually work with for tools and supporting the franchisees. So it's really, it's not a us against them, it's us all together, and looking at it about that. But another thing that came out of our conversation was a great idea. I think Red had brought it up. He had said, that which gets rewarded gets done. And this is again where you align on the overall goals and what you're trying to do. He threw out the idea, maybe for anybody down the marketing side that supports the Fran Dev side, maybe anytime a new franchisee is signed, maybe that person gets a $50 gift card or something like that, just to see, hey, how important that part of the business really is. Once they start getting that little bit of an incentive, they're going to work harder for the Fran Dev side, but also continue to do what they do for marketing. So really good conversation. Was excited to be a part of that group. So thank you.
Awesome. I'm a firm believer in pay for performance, 100%.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Andrea.
Hey, thank you.
Absolutely.
Great stuff. So we really want to follow the money, follow the objectives, follow where the highest and best use of time is. And ultimately on the dev side and the brand side, you want to get to a point of predictable revenue, right? And everybody wants that. And the only way to get to a point of predictable revenue is if you understand demand, you understand the amount of demand that you need to convert into business, and you understand the cost of that demand. And it really starts with, and I'll go back to Chip's point from the very beginning, it starts with collaboration, but it starts with business planning. So as we go into 2022, and you're planning for your predictable revenue on the dev side, you're planning for your predictable revenue on the brand side, you need to have both seats at the table. You need to have the brand to understand what that demand is going to be in order to understand what the brand revenue the brand is going to generate, to understand where you can develop and how much you can develop. And they have to have a seat at the planning session for devs. And that's really critical. And the only way that you can get both voices at the table, where you can get both voices to collaborate and to contribute, is to understand the benefit, the business benefit for each group to collaborate. It was funny because I was on the phone in our last session. We had Neighborly, and I'm forgetting her name for some reason, but, for Neighborly, and she said, well, she said, brand told me to change the color of a lightning bolt. Yeah, okay, I'll do that. And she said, I'll do that when I have the time, right? So that's not the interaction that we want between brand and development. We want meaningful interaction with each helping the other to come to the table as partners, not as subordinates, but as partners, to help get to that point, to get the business to the point of predictable revenue on both sides. That was our takeaway.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. And I think the last group, Shaq, is yours.
Yes, thank you. We had a great group. We had a little bit of a different perspective in our group. I think to echo what most everybody else has said is that that collaboration between marketing and development. But what some of the companies have done on our breakout group was have an actual liaison that's their role, is to be a liaison between development and marketing, and it's been impactful to have that collaboration there. The other thing that we had that is a little bit different is we had some global and development and marketing people on our call. So with some companies that have more of a global presence, or their focus was the global portion of the development, and just really understanding how to address the brand awareness and the different messaging and the marketing to the consumers and franchise development on the global side versus US side and what those needs are, and prioritizing that. And then Luke had also talked about using brokers, which is something that was another topic of conversation. So how do you market to the brokers? How are the brokers marketing your message out to your consumers, and what does that relationship look like too? Because that's kind of another layer or an additional layer to the franchise development and marketing internally that you're doing to your consumers and franchise candidates, but now you're also marketing to your brokers too, to have them be that voice for your brand when they're out talking to people also. So I think that's and then the last thing Lex had brought up, one thing that I think was everybody was wearing lots of hats. So they were either doing consumer and franchise development marketing, or they wear lots of hats within development or in marketing itself within the companies. But having that collaboration really gives the ability to have a genuine voice and genuine way to have the franchise messaging to the consumers who, like it has been said, are sometimes your franchisees or do become your franchisees or are a great resource for potential franchisees. And that message can be much more collaborative and genuine and flow and subtle to the consumers on the franchising development side, instead of being not quite as collaborative there. So those were the main points that we took away from our group.
Awesome. Did I potentially miss any groups or facilitators? Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you guys all for participating today. It was great to get to learn from each other and hear what some of you guys are doing. A big thank you to everyone who was on the panel, to all of our facilitators. Thank you so much. Just a couple quick reminders. We recorded the panel and this discussion, so this will be sent out after the fact. And then if you want to mark your calendar for our next webinar, it'll be on Wednesday, October the 27th, same time, 2 to 3:30. The registration link will pop up here in the chat, but of course you'll get some emails on it. And the title of that is What's Measured Can Be Improved, Benchmarking Your Franchise Sales Process. So that sounds like a good one. So we'll leave it with that. So thank you guys all so much for participating. It's been great getting to see some familiar faces and chat with some of you guys. And we will see you next time. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome job.